A broken engagement shouldn't feel like a public execution. But in high society, a discarded woman is nothing more than collateral damage. When Connor paraded his new mistress into the autumn charity gala, the ballroom collectively held its breath, waiting for Harper to break. They wanted tears. They wanted a pathetic scene to chew on with their overpriced appetizers. Instead, the gravity in the room shifted. A man whose name carried the quiet weight of a loaded gun stepped forward, ready to claim what a fool had thrown away. The champagne tasted like battery acid. Harper took another sip anyway, letting the sharp fizz burn the back of her throat. It gave her something to focus on besides the suffocating weight of 300 pairs of eyes. The Beaumont Autumn Gala was always a sterile affair, held in a downtown hotel ballroom that smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and expensive perfume. Tonight, the air felt thicker, stale. Harper stood near a towering ice sculpture of a swan, watching it slowly weep onto a bed of crushed ice. She felt a profound kinship with the melting bird. She shouldn't have come. That was the consensus. She could see it in the tight, pitying smiles of the women who passed her, and the averted gazes of the men who used to shake her hand and ask about her legal practice. 6 weeks ago, she had been half of a power couple. Harper and Connor. They were practically a single syllable in this social circle. Now, she was just the woman who didn't see it coming. She shifted her weight, the ball of her right foot throbbing against the unforgiving sole of her stilettos. Her dress, a deep emerald silk, felt like armor she wasn't qualified to wear. She had bought it 3 days ago, in a fit of defiance. "I will not hide," she had told herself in the fluorescent glare of the fitting room. "I am not the one who did something wrong." It was a beautiful sentiment. It was also entirely useless in practice. A sudden shift in the room's ambient noise pulled her from her thoughts. The low hum of polite conversation dipped, then spiked into a sharp, jagged static of whispers. The wealthy were never as subtle as they believed themselves to be. Heads turned toward the grand double doors at the entrance. Shoulders angled, glasses were lowered. Harper didn't need to look. Her stomach had already dropped, hitting the floor with a dull, sickening thud. Connor had arrived. He didn't just walk into a room. He occupied it. He had always possessed that arrogant, easy stride. The walk of a man who had never been told no and actually believed it. Harper turned her head a fraction of an inch, just enough to catch his reflection in the mirrored pillar beside the bar. He wore a custom navy tuxedo. The lapels caught the chandelier light. He looked effortlessly handsome, perfectly groomed, and utterly unbothered. But it wasn't Connor that caused the whispers. It was the woman clinging to his arm. Paige. Harper felt a cold sweat break across the nape of her neck. Paige was younger, 24 to Harper's 30. She worked as a junior associate at Connor's private equity firm. When Harper had first found the texts, paragraphs of hollow, cloying desperation sent at 3 in the morning, she had almost laughed. It was such a miserable cliché. The boss and the subordinate, the late nights at the office, the sudden, unexplained business trips to Chicago. Confronting him hadn't yielded an apology. It had yielded a lecture. Connor had stood in the kitchen they had remodeled together, leaning against the marble island, and told her that they had simply outgrown each other. He had made it sound like an administrative error. And now, here they were, making their society debut. Paige was wearing a dress the color of crushed pearls. It clung to her in ways that demanded attention. She was smiling, but it wasn't a nervous smile. It was the smile of a woman who knew exactly whose territory she was walking on and relished the crunch of the grass beneath her heels. Harper gripped her champagne flute. Her knuckles turned white. Don't look at them, a voice muttered. Harper didn't flinch. Her friend, Sarah, stepped up beside her, materializing from the crowd with 2 fresh drinks. Sarah shoved one into Harper's free hand and neatly extracted the empty one. "I'm not looking," Harper lied, her voice tight. "You're glaring at a mirror, Harper. It's close enough." Sarah took a heavy drink of her own champagne. "I can't believe he actually brought her. He told the board he was coming solo. I heard him say it." "He lied," Harper said flatly. "It's what he does. He probably planned this specifically to see if I'd run out the back door." "Are you going to?" Harper looked down at her hands. They were trembling, just a fraction. It was infuriating. She was a successful corporate litigator. She spent her days dismantling grown men in boardrooms and courtrooms. Yet the sight of the man who had shared her bed for 4 years, casually parading the instrument of her humiliation, made her want to crawl under the heavily draped catering tables. "No," Harper said, forcing the word out of her tight throat. "If I leave, he wins. He gets the narrative." "He's making a beeline," Sarah warned, her voice dropping an octave. 3 o'clock. Harper turned, slowly. She refused to be caught darting her eyes away like a frightened child. She squared her shoulders, feeling the cold silk of her dress slide against her skin, and faced the inevitable. The crowd parted for Connor and Paige, not out of respect, but out of a morbid, predatory curiosity. The guests were sharks circling a drop of blood in the water. They wanted a front-row seat to the collision. As Connor closed the distance, Harper studied his face. There was no hesitation, no guilt. His expression was shaped into a mask of polite, patronizing concern. It was the face he used when firing mid-level management. "Harper," Connor said, stopping exactly 3 feet away, the socially acceptable distance for strangers. "Connor." Her voice was steady, a small victory, but she took it. Paige stood pressed against his side, her hand resting flat against his chest. It was a deeply territorial gesture. Her eyes swept over Harper, taking in the emerald dress, the simple hair, the lack of a diamond on her left hand. Paige's gaze lingered there for a fraction of a second before darting up to Harper's face. "Hi, Harper," Paige said. Her voice was breathy, coated in a sugary sweetness that made Harper's teeth ache. "It's so brave of you to come out tonight." The word hung in the air. Brave. It was a surgical strike. It painted Harper as the wounded victim, dragging herself out of the house against all odds. It established Paige as the benevolent victor. Sarah scoffed quietly beside her, but Harper put a subtle hand out to stop her friend. This was her fight. "It's a charity gala, Paige, not a war zone," Harper said, her tone conversational, utterly devoid of heat. "Bravery isn't really required, just an invitation, which I assume you had to ask Connor to secure for you." Paige's sugary smile faltered for a second, a brief tightening of the skin around her eyes. Connor stepped in smoothly, ever the mediator in conflicts he himself created. "Now, Harper, there's no need for that," Connor said gently. The condescension in his tone was suffocating. "We saw you standing over here by yourself. We just wanted to come over and say hello, to show there are no hard feelings." "No hard feelings," Harper repeated. The words felt foreign in her mouth. "Exactly," Connor nodded. "We're all adults here. Things end. People move on. I'm glad to see you're keeping busy." He looked at her with a profound, hollow pity. That was the worst part. He didn't hate her. He simply didn't care about her anymore. He had discarded her, and now he wanted the public absolution of her polite greeting. He wanted everyone in the room to see that Connor was a gentleman, checking in on his unstable, bitter ex-fiancé. "I'm keeping very busy, Connor, though I don't recall needing your approval on my schedule." Harper took a sip of her champagne. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a violent, chaotic rhythm, but she kept her breathing slow. "It's just sad, is all," Paige chimed in, leaning heavier into Connor. "Seeing you over here, hiding by the ice sculpture. Connor told me how you get at these things. Anxious. He said you always needed him to hold your hand. It was a violation. To hear her private vulnerabilities, confessed in the quiet dark of their shared bedroom, weaponized by the woman who slept in that bed now. Harper felt a hot flush of anger rise in her cheeks. The edges of her vision blurred slightly. The people standing near them had stopped pretending to talk to each other. They were openly eavesdropping. Harper could hear the clinking of glasses, the soft rustle of expensive fabric. The silence of the audience was deafening. "I think," Harper started, her voice dangerously thin, "that you should both walk away." Connor sighed. A heavy, performative sound. He looked around the room, making eye contact with a few of his golfing buddies, shaking his head slightly. "Look at her. So emotional." "We're just trying to be civil, Harper. You're making a scene," Connor said softly. "You always do this. You take something small and you escalate it. Gaslighting. Right here in the middle of the Beaumont." Harper opened her mouth, the sharp, vitriolic words ready to spill out. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the cheap champagne directly into his arrogant, perfectly shaved face. But if she did, he won. He would be the victim of the crazy ex. She was trapped. And then, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. It wasn't a sudden silence this time. It was a physical recession of the crowd. The guests pressing in on them suddenly took a collective step back. The murmurs died entirely, replaced by a tense, electric stillness. A shadow fell over the small circle they had created. Harper didn't look up immediately. She smelled him first. A clean, sharp scent of cedar, crushed leaves, and expensive leather. It cut through the stale perfume and gin of the ballroom like a knife. "She isn't making a scene, Connor," a voice said. It was a deep baritone, quiet but possessing an absolute, terrifying authority. "You are simply boring her. And frankly, you're boring me." Connor turned, irritation flashing across his features, ready to dress down whoever had interrupted his performance. But the words died in his throat. His jaw locked. The arrogant ease drained from his posture in a single, breathless second. Harper finally looked up. Roman Falco stood there. He didn't belong in a room like this. Not because he lacked the wealth, but because he lacked the pretense. While the men in the room wore their tuxedos like costumes, Roman wore his bespoke black suit like a second skin. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from marble and then weathered by a very violent storm. Dark, heavy brows, framed eyes that were entirely black, unreadable and cold. He was a man who existed on the fringes of the city's polite society, whispered about in boardrooms but never spoken of loudly. He owned the shipping ports. He owned the unions. Half the politicians in the room owed their seats to his silent funding, and the other half lived in fear of him. The Falco family didn't just have money, they had power. The kind of power that didn't leave a paper trail. Roman didn't look at Connor. He didn't acknowledge Paige. His dark eyes were fixed entirely on Harper. "I apologize for the delay," Roman said, stepping smoothly into the space right beside Harper. He didn't crowd her, but his proximity changed the air pressure. "Traffic on the bridge." Harper stared at him. Her brain scrambled to process the information. She had never spoken to Roman Falco. She had seen him once, across a crowded courthouse lobby, surrounded by lawyers who looked terrified of him. That was it. Before she could form a question, she felt the heat of his hand at the small of her back. The touch was light, respectful, but incredibly firm. It sent a jolt straight up her spine. "Mr. Falco," Connor stammered. His voice was suddenly an octave higher. The apex predator had just realized he was standing next to a bigger set of teeth. "I didn't realize. I mean, we were just catching up." "Catching up," Roman repeated, the words slow and flat. He finally turned his gaze to Connor. It was like watching a spotlight pan across a dark yard. "Is that what you call it when you corner a woman to inflate your own fragile ego?" Connor swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. Paige looked terrified, shrinking behind Connor's arm, her previous bravado entirely evaporated. We were just saying hello," Connor managed to say, holding his hands up defensively. "Harper and I used to be engaged." "I am aware of your history," Roman said, his voice dropping lower, vibrating with quiet menace. "I am also aware of your lack of judgment. It is a flaw that will likely cost you heavily in the coming fiscal year, given the state of your firm's current structural vulnerabilities." Connor turned the color of ash. It wasn't a vague threat. It was a surgical strike at his business, delivered with the casual tone of a man discussing the weather. Roman knew about his firm. Roman was watching him. But right now, Roman continued, seamlessly shifting his attention back to Harper, his expression softening just a fraction. "I am only concerned with my evening, and you are wasting our time." He dismissed them. He didn't ask them to leave. He simply ceased to acknowledge their existence. Roman looked down at Harper. "Are you ready for that drink, or do you want to keep hovering by the melting swan?" he asked quietly. Harper looked into those dark, bottomless eyes. She saw the challenge there. She saw the lifeline being thrown to her in the middle of a freezing ocean. She didn't know what his game was. She didn't know the rules. But she knew that standing next to Roman Falco, she was untouchable. "A drink sounds perfect," Harper said, her voice remarkably steady. Roman nodded. But he didn't guide her toward the bar. Instead, he turned fully toward her. His hand moved from her spine, sliding up the bare skin of her back to cup the nape of her neck. His fingers were warm, rough with calluses. Harper gasped quietly, her eyes widening. The room around them ceased to exist. Roman stepped into her space. "Hold still," he murmured, his breath brushing against her cheek. Before she could process the command, he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, polite greeting. It was a slow, deliberate consumption. His lips moved over hers with absolute authority, demanding a response that Harper gave involuntarily. She felt the heavy slide of his suit jacket against her bare arms, tasted the faint, sharp bite of expensive whiskey on his tongue. The kiss grounded her, tethering her to the floor while the rest of the world spun violently out of control. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered loudly against the floor, but neither Roman nor Harper pulled away. Roman's thumb traced the line of her jaw, his grip firm, a possessive anchor in a sea of prying eyes. Harper's hands fluttered, then landed on his chest, her fingers curling into the crisp fabric of his shirt. Her heart wasn't hammering with panic anymore. It was pounding with adrenaline. When he finally broke the kiss, he didn't step back. He stayed close, his forehead hovering mere inches from hers. His dark eyes locked onto hers, stripping away the armor she had worn all night. "Let them look," Roman whispered, his voice meant only for her ears. Harper blinked, her breathing shallow, her lips tingling. She slowly turned her head. Connor looked like he had been physically struck. His mouth was slightly open, his face flushed a mottled, ugly red. The smug arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound, agonizing realization of his own insignificance. Paige was staring at the floor, visibly shaking. Roman didn't look at them. He simply dropped his hand back to Harper's waist, his grip securely claiming her side. "Shall we?" Roman asked, his voice returning to its normal, calm cadence, as if he hadn't just upended the entire social hierarchy of the room. Harper looked at Connor one last time. There was no pain left. There was no embarrassment. There was just a sudden, vast emptiness where her fear had been. "Yes," Harper said, tilting her chin up. "We shall." The walk from the ballroom to the valet stand took exactly 2 minutes. But to Harper, it felt like a grueling, suspended hour. Roman kept his hand firmly on the small of her back. It was a calculated pressure. He was steering her, yes, but he was also physically anchoring her to the ground. Her knees felt like they were filled with sand. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the confrontation was rapidly burning off, leaving a cold, shaky exhaustion in its wake. The hotel lobby was a blur of gilded mirrors and thick carpeting. The ambient noise of the street seeped in as the heavy glass doors slid open, hitting Harper with a rush of crisp, biting autumn air. She took a sharp breath, her lungs expanding painfully against the tight bodice of her silk dress. "Breathe," Roman instructed quietly. A black sedan sat idling at the curb. It wasn't a flashy sports car. It was an armored vehicle, heavy and brutally functional, the kind of car designed to take a bullet and keep driving. A man in a dark suit stood by the rear door. He didn't look like a chauffeur. He had the thick neck and flat, watchful eyes of a bouncer. He opened the door as they approached, his gaze scanning the street over Roman's shoulder. "Get in," Roman said. Harper hesitated. The cold air was sobering. She looked at the dark interior of the car, then up at Roman's impassive face. 5 minutes ago, she had been a discarded fiancé, nursing a bruised ego. Now, she was standing on a curb with a man the district attorney's office had spent a decade trying to indict. "I have my own car," she said. Her voice sounded thin, stripped of the bravado she had summoned in the ballroom. "You have half a glass of cheap champagne in your system and a minor shock," Roman countered, his tone perfectly level. "You aren't driving, and you aren't waiting here for a cab while Connor regains his courage and comes out to offer you a ride home. Get in, Harper." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The simple, unvarnished logic of his argument dismantled her resistance. Connor would follow her out. He couldn't stand an unresolved narrative where he wasn't the victor. Harper gathered the fabric of her skirt and slid into the back seat. The interior smelled of rich leather and the faint, clean scent of cedar that clung to Roman. The door clicked shut with a heavy, pressurized thud, instantly severing them from the noise of the city. Roman slid in beside her a second later, occupying the space with a quiet, overwhelming gravity. "Drive," Roman said to the man behind the wheel. The car pulled away from the curb, sliding seamlessly into the downtown traffic. The streetlights flickered across the leather seats in a rhythmic, passing glow. Harper pressed her back against the seat, staring straight ahead at the partition. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. Her lips still held the phantom pressure of his mouth, the sharp taste of whiskey lingering on her tongue. It felt deeply intrusive, yet entirely stabilizing. She waited for him to speak. She waited for the explanation, the punchline, the reveal of whatever sick bet he was fulfilling. When he remained silent, simply watching the city roll by his window, her lawyer instincts kicked in. The silence was a tactic. She used it in depositions all the time. Make the other person uncomfortable enough to speak first, to concede ground. "I charge $900 an hour for corporate consultation, Mr. Falco," Harper said, keeping her gaze fixed firmly on the partition. "So I'd appreciate it if you skipped the theatrics and told me exactly what that performance cost me." Roman turned his head. In the dim light of the cabin, his dark eyes caught the passing glare of a street lamp. A slow, genuine crack of amusement broke the hard line of his mouth. You think I staged a public spectacle at the Beaumont Gala for a free legal consultation? I think men like you don't do anything for free, Harper shot back, finally turning to look at him. You don't know me. I don't know you. You didn't just walk up to a crying woman out of the goodness of your heart. You weren't crying, Roman pointed out. If you had been crying, I would have walked past you. I have zero interest in fragile things. They require too much maintenance. The sheer, callous honesty of the statement made her blink. Then why? Roman shifted his weight, resting his arm along the back of the seat, his fingers mere inches from her shoulder. Because I despise Connor Hayes. I despise his firm. I despise his methods. And I despise the fact that he wears poorly tailored suits while pretending to be a master of the universe. Watching him attempt to humiliate you for the entertainment of his peers was offensive to my sensibilities. Harper let out a short, cynical laugh. Your sensibilities. Right. I forgot about the famous Falco code of ethics. Roman didn't flinch at the jab. I also stepped in because you were holding your ground. You were outgunned, you were outnumbered, and you were standing absolutely still. I respect a person who refuses to bleed for a crowd. He reached forward and opened a small, polished wood compartment between the seats, extracting 2 crystal tumblers and a decanter. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into each glass and handed one to her. Harper took it. She didn't drink, just let the warmth of the glass bleed into her freezing fingers. "The kiss," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its confrontational edge. That wasn't just to make him mad. No, Roman agreed easily. He took a slow sip of his drink. A handshake would have confused him. A verbal dressing down would have angered him. A kiss terrified him. It told him, and everyone else in that room, that you belong to me now, and no one touches what belongs to me. Harper stiffened. The cold returned, sharper this time. I don't belong to anyone. Roman looked at her, his eyes stripping her down to the studs. In polite society, perhaps. But in the world we just stepped into, perception is currency. Connor knows he can't touch you without inviting my retaliation. You are safe. That was the immediate goal. And the secondary goal? Harper asked, her grip tightening on the glass. We are going to my office, Roman said, turning his attention back to the window. We have a contract to negotiate. The car didn't stop at a warehouse by the docks, nor did it pull into a shadowy, subterranean parking garage. It pulled up to a towering glass and steel high-rise in the financial district. The building was a monument to clinical, aggressive corporate wealth. Roman led her through the empty marble lobby. The security guards didn't ask for identification. They simply stood straighter as he passed, tapping key cards to express elevators before he even had to slow his stride. They rode in silence to the 42nd floor. When the stainless steel doors parted, Harper stepped into a space that felt less like an office and more like a fortress, disguised as an architectural digest spread. The floors were poured concrete, polished to a dull shine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, dizzying view of the city skyline, a grid of yellow lights stretching out into the dark. There were no desks, no cubicles, just a massive slab of reclaimed wood serving as a conference table, surrounded by leather chairs. Roman took his jacket off, tossing it casually over the back of a chair. The simple action changed the dynamic in the room. He looked less like a phantom from the gala and more like a man getting ready for a 12-hour shift. He walked over to a wet bar built into the wall and set his glass down. "Sit," he offered, gesturing to the table. Harper remained standing near the window. "I prefer to know what I'm walking into before I sit down, Mr. Falco." "Roman," he corrected, pouring himself a glass of water. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest, the white dress shirt pulled tight across his shoulders. "I know your portfolio, Harper. You spent the last 4 years at Sterling and Vance, handling corporate restructuring and aggressive mergers. You are ruthless in a deposition, and you find loopholes that entirely bypass state regulations. I ensure my clients operate within the legal parameters defined by the state," Harper corrected automatically, a reflex drilled into her by years of corporate conditioning. "Save the boilerplate," Roman said, waving a hand dismissively. "I need a lawyer who understands how to break a man financially without breaking the law. My family is diversifying. We are buying up legitimate commercial real estate, specifically the waterfront properties on the east side." Harper frowned, the alcohol and adrenaline finally giving way to sharp professional clarity. "The East Side Development Project, that's being spearheaded by a private equity coalition." "A coalition funded entirely by Connor Hayes," Roman finished for her. "Yes." Harper felt a sudden, distinct click in her brain. The pieces fell into place with a heavy metallic thud. "Connor is blocking your acquisitions." "He is trying to," Roman amended. "He is using zoning boards, environmental impact studies, and historical preservation claims to tie my holding companies up in litigation. He thinks he can bleed me out with legal fees and construction delays." "And you want to hire me to countersue?" "I want to hire you to crush him," Roman said. There was no anger in his voice. It was a simple statement of logistical intent. "I want you to audit his coalition. I want you to find the shell companies he's using to hide his over-leveraged assets. I want you to dismantle his little empire brick by brick, legally, so he can't cry to the federal regulators." Harper walked slowly to the heavy wooden table, trailing her fingers over the smooth edge. She looked at Roman. "You could hire any firm in the city to do this. You probably already have a dozen lawyers on retainer who specialize in this exact brand of corporate warfare." "I do," Roman agreed, "but none of them have a personal vendetta against Connor Hayes. None of them know how he thinks, how he hides his money, or what his weaknesses are. You shared a bed with the man for 4 years. You know where the bodies are buried." "I don't know anything about his business dealings," Harper lied smoothly. Roman smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You're a brilliant, observant woman who was engaged to a narcissist. Narcissists brag. He told you things. Maybe you didn't care at the time, but the files are in your head." He walked over to the table, stopping directly across from her. "I am offering you a position as exclusive legal counsel for Falco Holdings," Roman said. "I will double your current salary. I will give you unlimited resources, a dedicated investigative team, and absolute autonomy. Your only mandate is to clear the board for my acquisitions." Harper stared at him. The sheer audacity of the offer was staggering. He was handing her a loaded gun and pointing her directly at the man who had ruined her life. It was a deeply vindictive, beautiful proposition. "You kissed me in front of 300 people, Harper said, her voice quiet in the cavernous room. "You put a target on my back." "I put a shield on your back," Roman corrected. "Until tomorrow morning, Connor thought you were a liability, a bitter ex who might cause a scene. Now, he knows you are allied with me. He won't try to smear your reputation in the society pages. He won't try to quietly edge you out of your firm. He is going to be far too busy trying to save his own throat." Harper looked out the window at the city. She thought about Paige's smug smile. She thought about Connor's patronizing hand gestures. She thought about the last 6 weeks of feeling like a ghost in her own life, apologizing for her own heartbreak. "If I take this," Harper said, turning her gaze back to Roman's dark, unblinking eyes. "I don't report to your lieutenants. I don't deal with intermediaries. I deal with you. Exclusively. Roman agreed. And if Connor tries to settle, we don't settle, Roman said flatly. We acquire. Harper let out a long, slow breath. The cynical, rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a mistake. You don't make deals with men who operate in the shadows. You don't let a mobster weaponize your grief. But the grounded, deeply human part of her, the part that had stood freezing next to a melting ice sculpture while the world laughed at her, wanted to burn it all down. Draft the contract, Harper said. I want it on my desk by 8 a.m. If the indemnification clauses meet my standards, I'll sign. Roman's posture relaxed, just a fraction. A dangerous, predatory satisfaction settled over his features. I'll have my driver take you home. No, Harper said, picking up her small clutch from the table. I'll call a car. I need the fresh air. She didn't wait for his permission. She turned and walked toward the elevators. As the heavy steel doors slid open, she looked back. Roman was still standing by the table, watching her with a heavy, calculating intensity. For the first time in 6 weeks, Harper didn't feel like crying. She felt lethal. The sunlight in Harper's office was too bright. It sliced through the floor-to-ceiling blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing over her mahogany desk. She had slept for exactly 3 hours. The adrenaline crash had finally taken her around 4 a.m., pulling her into a dark, dreamless sleep. Now at 8:15 a.m., she was running entirely on bitter black coffee and sheer, stubborn momentum. Her office at the firm of Davies and Croft was a testament to her success. It was a corner suite, decorated in muted greys and crisp whites. Usually, it felt like a sanctuary. This morning, it felt like a stage. The gossip had beaten her to the building. She had felt it the moment she stepped off the elevator. The paralegals had stopped talking abruptly. The junior associates had stared at their shoes as she walked past. Even the receptionist, a woman who had known Harper for 4 years, handed over her phone messages with a wide-eyed, terrified expression. Harper kissed Roman Falco. The narrative had mutated, of course. By the time it reached the water cooler, she wasn't just an allied business partner. She was the Mafia boss's new obsession. She was dangerous by proxy. Harper sat at her desk, staring at the thick, cream-colored envelope, sitting squarely in the center of her blotter. Roman was a man of his word. She broke the wax seal with her letter opener and slid the contract out. It was 20 pages of dense, immaculate legalese. She read through it with a clinical detachment, highlighting clauses, checking the indemnification phrasing. It was airtight. He was offering her an obscene amount of money, a terrifying amount of power, and absolute legal protection. She picked up her pen, signed the final page with a sharp, decisive stroke, and hit the intercom button on her desk. "Janet," Harper said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Please come in here." Her assistant practically scurried into the room, holding a digital tablet like a shield. "Yes, Ms. Hayes. It's just Harper, Janet," she corrected smoothly. "I need you to scan this contract and send it to the courier address listed on the front page. Then, I need you to pull every public filing, tax return, and corporate registry document for Hayes Equity Partners for the last 5 years. Print them. Bring them to me." Janet blinked, her mouth opening and closing. "Hayes Equity? But that's Connor's." "I am aware of whose firm it is, Janet. I need the files by noon." Before Janet could respond, the heavy glass door to Harper's office swung open. Arthur Davies, the managing partner of the firm, stood in the doorway. He was a man who usually commanded a room with jovial, booming authority. Today, he looked pale, his tie slightly askew, carrying a look of profound discomfort. "Harper," Arthur said, stepping inside and closing the door firmly behind him. He glanced at Janet. "Give us a minute, Janet." The assistant vanished, the door clicking shut. Arthur approached her desk slowly, as if he expected it to detonate. He placed both hands on the back of the guest chair, but didn't sit. "I received a very interesting phone call this morning," Arthur began, clearing his throat. His voice lacked its usual bombast. "From a Mr. Thomas Vance. He claims to be the primary legal counsel for Falco Holdings." Harper leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "I'm assuming he informed you that I am transitioning to an exclusive retainer with their firm." Arthur dragged a hand across his face. "Harper, what are you doing? Roman Falco? Do you have any idea the kind of heat that brings to this firm? We represent banks. We represent hedge funds. We do not represent organized crime syndicates. Falco Holdings is a registered, tax-paying logistics and real estate conglomerate, Arthur," Harper said calmly, citing the exact phrasing from the contract she had just signed. "They are entirely legitimate on paper, and they are paying double my current billing rate to secure my exclusive services." "It's dirty money," Arthur hissed, leaning forward. "And the rumor mill, Harper, my God. Connor called me at 6 a.m. in an absolute panic. He said you sicked Falco on him at the Beaumont last night. He's demanding we fire you, claiming a conflict of interest." Harper felt a cold, sharp spike of satisfaction. Connor was panicking. The polished, arrogant man who had discarded her like a broken toy was calling his former boss at dawn, begging for protection. "Connor Hayes is not a client of this firm," Harper stated, her voice dropping to a hard, unyielding register. "Therefore there is no conflict of interest. As for firing me, you can certainly try, Arthur, but I suggest you review the retainer agreement Falco Holdings just sent over. If you terminate my employment, the Falco family will consider it a breach of contract." Arthur froze. He stared at her, genuinely horrified. "Are you threatening the firm?" "I am informing you of the legal reality of the situation," Harper said smoothly. "I am staying in this office. I am using my team, and I am going to audit Connor Hayes until his firm bleeds out on the pavement. You get to keep 20% of my billing for the privilege of housing me. I suggest you take the money and look the other way, Arthur. It's what you do best." The managing partner opened his mouth, closed it, and slowly backed away from the desk. He didn't recognize the woman sitting in front of him. 6 weeks ago, Harper had taken 3 days off to cry in her apartment. Today, she was holding the entire firm hostage with a single signature. "You're playing a very dangerous game, Harper," Arthur warned quietly, his hand on the doorknob. "Men like Falco don't respect boundaries. When he's done using you to hurt Connor, he'll own you." "Nobody owns me," Harper replied. Arthur left, the heavy door shutting behind him. Harper sat in the silence of her office. Her heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm. The fear was there, a low hum in the back of her mind, but it was eclipsed entirely by the purpose. Her desk phone rang. It wasn't the internal line. It was her direct, private number, the one only a few people had. She picked it up without looking at the caller ID. "Harper, please tell me the rumors are a lie." Connor's voice cracked through the receiver. He sounded ragged. The smooth, patronizing baritone was entirely gone. "Harper, please, tell me you didn't actually make a deal with him." Harper closed her eyes, letting the sound of his desperation wash over her. It was better than the champagne. It was better than the silence. "Hello, Connor," Harper said, her tone conversational, perfectly mirroring the voice he had used on her the night before. "I'm afraid I'm quite busy this morning." "I'm keeping very busy, just like you suggested." "Harper, he's a monster. You don't know what you're doing. He's already pulled the zoning permits on the dock project. My investors are threatening to pull out. You have to call him off." "I don't call him off, Connor. I just point him." "Why are you doing this?" Connor shouted, his voice pitching high with genuine panic. "Because of Paige. Because I moved on. It's pathetic, Harper. You're destroying my life over a bruised ego." Harper opened her eyes. She looked at the city outside her window. She thought about the cold, heavy reality of Roman's world and the shallow, pathetic reality of Connor's. "I'm not destroying your life over an ego, Connor," Harper said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadpan calm. "I'm destroying your life because it's my job, and frankly, you're boring me." She hung up the phone. Before she could even set the receiver back in its cradle, a notification dinged on her computer. An email from an encrypted, unnamed server. She clicked it open. It contained a single line of text. "Good girl. The car will be downstairs at 6 p.m. Dress warmly." Harper stared at the screen, the cold satisfaction in her chest suddenly replaced by a sharp, electric jolt of anticipation. The game had officially begun. The wind off the harbour tasted like salt, diesel, and decaying iron. Harper stepped out of the black sedan at exactly 6:45 p.m. The high rises of the financial district were visible in the distance, a grid of glittering gold against the bruised purple twilight. But out here on the industrial piers, the city felt like a rumour. Massive steel shipping containers were stacked like grim, rusted Lego blocks. Floodlights cut through the sea mist, casting long, skeletal shadows across the wet concrete. Roman was waiting near the edge of the pier. He was leaning against the heavy railing, smoking a cigarette. The bright orange cherry flared as he took a drag, illuminating the hard, sharp angles of his face. He wore a heavy wool overcoat, the collar turned up against the wind. He didn't look like a CEO tonight. He looked like the environment he commanded. Cold, unyielding, and dangerous. Harper pulled her trench coat tighter around herself. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement, a sound completely swallowed by the rhythmic, groaning crash of the dark water against the pilings. "You told me to dress warmly," Harper said, stopping a few feet away. "You didn't mention I'd be visiting a shipyard." Roman didn't smile. He dropped the cigarette onto the concrete and crushed it slowly beneath the heel of his boot. "You can't understand a war if you only look at the map, Harper. You have to see the dirt." He gestured for her to step closer to the edge. She did, gripping the icy steel railing. Below them, the black water churned. Across the channel, a massive swathe of waterfront property lay dormant. Chain-link fences topped with razor wire surrounded acres of empty warehouses and cracked asphalt. "That is the East Side Development Project," Roman said. His voice was barely louder than the wind, yet it carried with absolute clarity. 30 acres of deep water access. Connor looks at that and sees luxury condos, boutique coffee shops, and a marina for yachts that leave port twice a year. He sees a sterilized playground for the people we drank champagne with last night. "And what do you see?" Harper asked, turning her head to look at him. Roman kept his eyes on the dead land across the water. "I see a logistical throat. Whoever controls that port controls 20% of the commercial freight entering this seaboard. I don't want to build coffee shops, Harper. I want to control the supply chain that brings the coffee into the country." The scale of his ambition hit her like a physical weight. Connor was playing a game of status. Roman was playing a game of empires. "He blocked the zoning permits," Harper said, shifting into the analytical space where she felt safest. "He used a coalition of shell LLCs to buy up the surrounding residential blocks, then filed environmental injunctions claiming your freight traffic would violate noise ordinances." "He bought the local alderman," Roman corrected bluntly, "and he is using a dummy corporation based in Delaware to funnel the bribe money as consulting fees." Harper frowned. "I can prove the shell companies belong to his private equity firm. Give me a week. The paper trail is always there, no matter how much they pay accountants to bury it." Roman finally turned to look at her. The floodlights caught his dark eyes, making them look completely pitch black. "I don't just want you to find the paper trail. I want you to weaponize it. I want Connor to wake up one morning and find that the ground he's standing on is owned by me." He stepped closer. The smell of the ocean was suddenly replaced by the scent of his cologne, cedar and smoke. He reached out, his gloved hand brushing a stray lock of hair that the wind had whipped across her cheek. "Are you afraid of this, Harper?" he asked quietly. It was a genuine question. There was no mockery in it. Harper looked at the rusted cranes, the black water, and the man standing in front of her. She thought about the sterile, predictable life she had mapped out with Connor. The country club dinners, the polite, suffocating arguments, the inevitable, quiet betrayal. "No," Harper said. Her voice didn't shake. "I'm not afraid. I'm angry, and I am very, very good at my job." Roman's hand lingered on the side of her neck for a fraction of a second, his thumb pressing lightly against her pulse point. He felt the steady, calm rhythm of her heartbeat. A slow, dangerous smile broke across his face. "Good," Roman said softly. "Then let's go build a guillotine." It took exactly 32 days. Harper didn't sleep much during that month. She operated out of a private conference room on the 42nd floor of Falco Holdings, surrounded by whiteboards covered in corporate structures, banking records, and property deeds. She systematically dismantled Connor's financial architecture. It was brutal, meticulous work. Connor was not a genius. He was simply a man born on third base who believed he had hit a triple. He had over-leveraged his assets, using the same commercial properties as collateral for multiple loans across different banks. It was a house of cards held together by arrogance and fraudulent accounting. The killing blow was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in the neutral territory of a mediator's office downtown. Harper wore a tailored charcoal suit. She carried a single slim leather briefcase. As she walked into the glass-walled conference room, the temperature seemed to drop. Connor was already there. He sat at the head of the long oak table, flanked by two senior partners from his legal team. Paige sat slightly behind him, holding a tablet, looking like a woman trying very hard to appear indispensable. Connor looked terrible. The confident, golden boy veneer had cracked. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his suit hung slightly loose on his frame. The past month of legal hemorrhaging had aged him 5 years. He glared at Harper as she took her seat at the opposite end of the table. "This is a waste of time," Connor snapped, leaning forward. "We aren't lifting the environmental injunctions on the East Side docks, Harper, and this pathetic harassment campaign you've been running is bordering on extortion." Harper didn't open her briefcase. She simply folded her hands on the table. "I'm not here to negotiate the environmental injunctions, Connor. I'm here to execute a transfer of assets." Before Connor could respond, the door to the conference room opened. Roman walked in. He didn't bring lawyers. He didn't bring muscle. He walked in alone, wearing a midnight blue suit, projecting a quiet, absolute authority that immediately sucked the air out of the room. Connor's lawyers physically recoiled, sinking lower into their leather chairs. Roman walked the length of the room and took the seat directly to Harper's right. He leaned back, unbuttoned his jacket, and looked at Connor with the mild curiosity of a man inspecting a damaged piece of furniture. "Proceed, Ms. Hayes," Roman said quietly. Harper finally unclasped her briefcase. She pulled out a stack of 3 thick, bound folders and slid them down the polished oak table. They stopped directly in front of Connor. "What is this?" Connor asked, refusing to touch them. "That is a comprehensive audit of your private equity firm," Harper said, her voice crisp and clinical. "Specifically, it details the fraudulent cross-collateralization of the Hudson commercial blocks. You used the same 3 buildings to secure loans from Capital Fidelity and Union Mutual. hiding the debt through a shell company in Delaware. A company, I might add, that lists your personal assistant as the primary shareholder. Paige stiffened in her chair, her face draining of color. She looked at Connor, panic flaring in her eyes. "Connor?" Connor didn't look at her. He stared at the folders, a bead of sweat tracing the line of his jaw. "You hacked our servers. This is inadmissible. I subpoenaed your servers during the discovery phase of the defamation lawsuit I filed against you 3 weeks ago," Harper corrected smoothly. "You were too busy panicking over the dock permits to read the fine print of the discovery orders your lawyers blindly signed." She leaned forward, dropping the lawyerly detachment. She wanted him to feel this. "You are bankrupt, Connor. You are worse than bankrupt, because when the federal regulators see these documents, you are going to federal prison for bank fraud." Silence crashed down over the room. Connor's lawyers were staring at the documents, rapidly flipping through the pages, their expressions morphing from annoyance to sheer, unadulterated horror. One of them closed the folder, pushed his chair back, and looked at Connor. "We can't represent you in a criminal fraud investigation," the lawyer said, his voice shaking. "We're corporate counsel." "Sit down," Connor barked, his voice cracking. He looked wildly across the table at Harper, then at Roman. "This is a bluff. You can't just take my firm." "I don't want your firm," Roman spoke up, his voice a low, heavy rumble. "Your firm is toxic. I want the 30 acres of residential property you bought up around my docks, the property you purchased with those fraudulent loans." Harper pulled a single sheet of paper from her briefcase and slid it across the table. "This is a transfer of deed," Harper explained. "You are going to sign over the Hudson blocks and the East Side residential properties to Falco Holdings for the sum of $1. In exchange, Falco Holdings will assume the debt on those properties and pay off your fraudulent loans before the banks realize you lied to them." "You're stealing it," Connor whispered, staring at the paper as if it were a loaded gun. "You're stealing everything I built. I am saving you from a 10-year sentence in federal prison," Harper replied coldly. "Sign the paper, Connor. Then take whatever liquid cash you have left, pack your things, and get out of my city." Connor looked at her. He was looking for the woman he had discarded at the gala. He was looking for the soft, compliant fiancé who would eventually cave to his emotional manipulation. But there was nothing left for him to manipulate. Harper's eyes were flat, hard, and entirely devoid of pity. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so violently he had to press his other hand flat against the table to steady himself. He signed the document, the scratch of the nib sounding unnaturally loud in the silent room. He threw the pen down and stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "Are you happy, Harper?" Connor spat, his face twisted in a pathetic, ugly sneer. "You ruined me. Over what? Over her?" He gestured vaguely toward Paige, who was still sitting frozen in her chair. "No," Harper said, carefully sliding the signed document back into her briefcase. "I ruined you because it was a Tuesday, and because my client asked me to. Paige had nothing to do with it." She looked past Connor to the young woman sitting against the wall. Paige looked terrified, staring at the shattered remains of the powerful man she had hitched herself to. The money was gone. The status was gone. All that was left was a sweating, broke fraud. "You should probably call a cab, Paige," Harper said, her tone indifferent. "I highly doubt he can afford his car payments this month." Paige stood up, clutching her tablet to her chest. She didn't look at Connor. She walked quickly out of the conference room, the heavy glass door shutting behind her with a definitive click. Connor stood alone at the head of the table. His lawyers had already packed their briefcases, quietly edging toward the door. He was entirely, completely isolated. Roman stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, adjusting his cuffs with slow, deliberate precision. He didn't say a word to Connor. He simply looked at him, acknowledging his ruin, and then turned his back. "Let's go, Harper," Roman said. Harper stood, picked up her briefcase, and walked out of the room. She didn't look back. The penthouse apartment at the top of the Falco Tower was dark, lit only by the sprawling, infinite grid of the city below. Harper stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the water. From up here, she could just barely make out the dark, industrial smudge of the East Side docks. Tomorrow, construction would begin. The fences would come down. The empire would expand. She heard the soft clink of ice against crystal, followed by the heavy, measured footsteps of Roman crossing the poured concrete floor. He handed her a tumbler of amber liquid. She took it, their fingers brushing. His skin was warm to a hostile takeover, Roman said quietly, raising his own glass. To a bloodless war, Harper countered, clinking her glass against his. The whiskey burned going down, sharp and clean. The silence between them wasn't tense anymore. It was comfortable. Over the past month, they had spent hundreds of hours in each other's orbit. They had eaten takeout over spread-out blueprints at 2 a.m. They had debated legal theory in the backs of armored cars. Harper had learned the quiet, brutal rhythms of his life, and Roman had learned the sharp, brilliant architecture of her mind. "Connor left the city 3 hours ago," Roman said, stepping up to the window beside her. "He booked a one-way flight to Miami. No return ticket." Harper took another sip of her drink. She searched herself for a lingering trace of grief, a phantom twinge of the heartbreak that had consumed her 6 weeks ago. There was nothing. Connor felt like a character from a movie she had watched a long time ago and didn't particularly enjoy. "Good," Harper said simply. Roman turned his head, watching her profile in the dim light. "Your contract is officially fulfilled. You cleared the board. You are a very wealthy woman, Harper. You could walk away right now. Start your own firm. Take a year off and sit on a beach." Harper turned to face him. She looked at the hard lines of his jaw, the dark, assessing intelligence in his eyes. "Are you firing me, Roman?" she asked, a small, dangerous smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "I am giving you an exit," Roman corrected, his voice dropping, taking on that rough, intimate gravity that always made the air in the room feel thinner. "Because if you stay, this stops being a transaction. You've seen how I operate. You know exactly what kind of man I am. If you stay, you are in. Permanently." He wasn't talking about a legal retainer anymore. He was talking about a partnership. He was talking about standing beside him in the dark. Harper stepped closer. The distance between them evaporated, leaving only the charged electric heat that had been building since the night of the gala. "I know exactly what kind of man you are," Harper said, her voice quiet but entirely steady. "You're a man who doesn't tolerate fragile things, which is why I fit perfectly into your world." Roman's eyes darkened. The careful, restrained control he always carried himself with seemed to fracture, just a fraction. He reached out, his hand sliding around the nape of her neck, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, the exact same possessive, anchoring grip he had used on the night they met. But this time, there was no audience. There was no performance. "You don't just fit into my world, Harper," Roman murmured, his face lowering until his breath ghosted across her lips. "You tore it apart and rebuilt it in 30 days. You're terrifying." "Is that a complaint?" she whispered. "It's a surrender," he said. When he kissed her, it wasn't a sudden, violent consumption like the first time. It was a slow, deliberate claim. It was the sealing of a pact. Harper let her hands slide up his chest, her fingers curling into the lapels of his suit, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, tasting of whiskey and absolute power. A collision of two people who had finally found an equal in the wreckage. When they finally broke apart, Roman kept his forehead resting against hers, his breathing slightly rough. Harper looked past his shoulder, out the window, at the sprawling, illuminated grid of the city below. It wasn't just a skyline anymore. It was theirs. That concludes the explosive high-stakes journey of her ex brought his mistress to shame her. The Mafia boss kissed her before everyone. Harper didn't just survive Connor's betrayal. She rewrote the rules of the game and built an empire alongside Roman Falco. When a brilliant mind meets absolute power, the city never stands a chance. Did you love Harper's ruthless revenge? Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. If you want more intense, emotionally grounded stories of revenge, romance, and power, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.